My name is Bob Steinberg, full name Robert Burns Steinberg. My mother was of Scottish extraction from Australia, so she wanted me to have Burns as a middle name. She thought if I ever wanted to change it, I could just keep the Burns and have that Scottish side. I got into the Marine Corps, surprisingly, I didn't realize that the Marine Corps had an air wing. And I went into the Marine office and looked around, and they had aircraft, they had helicopters, and so I said, wow, the Marine Corps has an air wing? He said, yeah. And the Army recruiter had lied to me. I wore glasses, and he says, what do you want to be? I said, I'd like to be a helicopter pilot. Oh yeah, we can do that. I said, yeah, but I wear glasses. And he said, I don't see that here. He had my physical stuff, and I knew he was lying, because once I got in and I had to put glasses on to see properly, the trick was up. So I knew I wasn't going to go into the Army, and so I pursued the Marine enlistment thing, and went through all the motions, and then I said, okay, well, I'm going to be going to the Marine Corps. Great. And somewhere like maybe late December or January, I figured I'd be able to pick it out. And I went down to Florida, stayed with my sister for a month. I come back, it's just before Christmas of 1965, and there was mail, and it was from Uncle Sam, and he said, hey, you're going into the Army about maybe January 7th or something like that. And I panicked. I went to the recruiter. This was up on 23rd Street, the recruiting office, and I said, look, what can I do? He says, well, you have to come to the Marine Corps first, and then they can't get you, but if you wait till after the 7th, you're theirs. I said, okay, well, when do you want to go in? I said, as soon as possible. So I said, okay, like maybe tomorrow, whatever it was. I said, okay, sure, I'll do it. And that day was December 31st, 1965. That's when I signed the papers, took a bus down to Newark Airport, got on a plane. We had our meal tickets and everything, and travel tickets. It was about 4 of us. And we flew down to Columbia, South Carolina, got on a bus over to Parris Island, and some point between Columbia and Parris Island, it became January 1st, 1966. So that was it, and that's when the fun started. So so I went into the Marine Corps boot camp, got out of boot camp in I guess it was March of late February, early March of '66. Went to ITR at Camp Geiger, and I had aviation guaranteed, so I knew I was going to be going to Memphis. I was the top Marine in our class, which was a combined Navy Marine enlisted class, and we had our choice. The top guy had the first choice of whatever was available. It didn't really matter, because we all went out to helicopters in Santa Ana. So I went out there to LTA in Tustin. I went into an H-34 training outfit, HMT 301. Then they were forming up a 46 training outfit, HMT 302. They sent me over there as quickly as they could after I got back from guard duty. And but it was fortunate, because I was an E3, and the other folks in the shop were a corporal, I believe, a sergeant, and a gunnery sergeant. So I got to do a lot of the parking lot sign paintings and status boards, everything that a forming squadron needs. Good. And then when they were forming up HMM 364 in the early part of 1967, a lot of the folks from HMMT 302 volunteered to go over there, and I was one of them. And again, parking lot signs, status boards, and but now I was outranking more of the guys, so the work distribution was a little bit more even. But it was just a good experience, because there was a lot of cohesiveness because of the folks that came over almost as a group, pilots, highly trained pilots, training pilots. So there was a real good esprit de corps. 364 Mystique, Legend, I wasn't aware of any. I didn't know that it had been a 34 outfit in Vietnam. All I knew was, all I think most of us knew, was that the colors had been brought back to the States and we were going to be reconstituted as the first CH-46 Delta operational squadron.
You know, when we were getting ready to go overseas, everybody had an idea of what it was going to be like for them. I think the standard feeling was, you know, you go to Vietnam, you're going to get killed. You know, no one's going to come back alive. But not everybody felt that way. But I think it was good just to get your defenses up. You know, a little bit of stress is good for you.
How we lived in Vietnam, we were in the second group that went over. The first group was a small contingent that flew over, getting things prepared for us. So they had the experience of erecting the tents and putting down all the pallets that the tents were built around to keep us out of the dirt. We went over in the Valley Forge, LPH-8 Valley Forge. We arrived, left Long Beach about, actually it was on, I believe, the Marine Corps birthday, November 10th. Arrived off Vietnam, I believe it was November 27th. And our folks came out to bring pilots and crew members to fly the 32 aircraft that were on board the Valley Forge to Phu Bai. And we thought, wow, look at those, you know, they're in these dirty flight suits. They've got these 38 sidearms. Wow, this is going to be great. But when we got to Phu Bai, we were living in tents on the south side of the field. There were no hooches. The tents leaked. So there's supposed to be 8-man tents, but you might get 3 or 4 guys in there, just because wherever the bunk was, you made sure that's not where the rain was coming through when it rained, and it did rain. Because it was getting into winter and it got cold. Very damp cold went right through you. It was kind of basic living. The line shack was a tent. I think it had hard sides, but it was muddy. We had a tractor, like a farm tractor for a tug. It was, it wasn't harsh living, but there were no amenities. We got there the end of November, so the beginning of December, they started doing missions. The problem was that, excuse me, for armament, all we had were M60s. The 34s had M60s. All the 46 outfits, even the Alpha models, that's all they had were Alpha models. They all had 50 cals. So we knew we were kind of underarmed, but we didn't have a choice. That's what we had, and that's what we used. And they were flying whatever missions they gave us. I'm not sure what they were, of course, but I was on, everybody wanted to fly. All the guys in the shops wanted to fly as gunners. There was no lack of enthusiasm, or there was a lack of flight skins, flight pay. They only had maybe, let's say, 2 full sets of flight skins to give to each shop. But what they would do is they would divide it in half, so everybody had a chance to fly and be a gunner. So I flew as a gunner the second half of December. Let's see, the first Harry mission, a lot of times you don't realize that they're shooting at you until maybe holes start going through the cabin. Or maybe there's something that's unrelated to getting shot. There's something that fails and now you gotta, but some of those things became more or less routine. You know, I remember taking fire and, one incident, it was a zone, a regular zone. There was nothing going on, and yet we took off out of there and we took fire. And the guy that was sitting right behind the right gun, on the, he's sitting like this, had his hands on his knees, and his thumb got almost blown off. So things happen like that, and I remember that. But there were other times that we took fire that I don't remember that vividly. They weren't that exceptional. But the hairiest, I guess, mission that I took part in, we didn't take any fire at all. The grunts on the ground said otherwise, but I think that they were getting the days mixed up. This was about a 4-day period that we got 3 ships shot out of the zone on successive days, and Major Al Chancey was the day before us, and he almost lost his life from loss of blood because of getting shot out of the zone. So that was that was going to be, it turns out, the hairiest mission I had. And again, we didn't, as far as I know, take any fire whatsoever. What happened was the grunts had come across a big NVA contingent at High Van Pass. Didn't even suspect they were there, and they got slaughtered. And we had to go in there and get the medevacs out. And for 3 days, they kept getting shut out of the zone. So now it's our turn. Ken Altazan was the crew chief, and he's looking for volunteers. He's walking around, he's a Louisiana boy. I'm looking for volunteer for tail gunner. I want a guy that gets his jolly shooting, you know. So that was old Ken. And I said, well, I don't get my jolly shooting M60s off of ramps, but I think I'd like to be part of this, you know, because nobody doesn't want to be a hero. And I think that's maybe what makes the Marine Corps the Marine Corps. You don't want to let your buddies down. You want to maintain what you feel is the Marine Corps tradition. I said, I'll go, kind of thing. And so I had to go. I got the M60, and we got the brief. I won't give the whole brief here, but we were expecting to take a lot of fire based on the 3 previous days. So I had, I don't know, thousands and thousands of ramps. I was going to have a gunner's belt attached to one of the hooks there on the ramp. It can be half-masted. Instead of 500 rounds per 50, we were going to carry 1,000 rounds per 50 because we figured we're shooting going in, shooting going out. We were only going to go in once. And part of the briefing, I'm not giving you the whole thing, was we were going to dump fuel, go in there with minimum fuel so we could take on as many passengers as medevacs as possible. And going up to just before all this happened, now we go in there. We're not taking any fire. I had to unhook my gunner's belt to drop a chainsaw down through the hellhole so they could clear a little bit more stuff out of there. I had blown a LZ with a C4. And we're out there orbiting. Now we get the okay to come in. We come in, and Major Lowry, Horace Lowry, Hoss, was the hack, and he pulled it the nose right into the side of the mountain, and it was very, very steep. So even though he was up against, as far as he could, up against the side of the mountain, and to give you an idea how close he was and how steep it was, they had lowered they knew this was going to happen. They were going to lower the main cabin door and bring the medevacs in through the front. So you don't have to climb up very far so they were really close. But I was still out there hanging in the breeze, but I'm looking, I hadn't hooked up my gunner's belt, and I'm looking around trying to see if I could see any muzzle flashes, hear any fire. I heard nothing. So nobody fired any rounds. We had 2,000 rounds of 50 cal ammo, thousands of rounds of M60 stuff, because I knew I was going to be shooting all that. And 17 medevacs. So we had the 2 pilots on the front, left gunner, right gunner, tail gunner, that was me, and Ken Altazan, and 17 medevacs. So the way it was briefed, we were going to back out of the zone, and as soon as we got clear, we were going to go down on the top of the triple canopy jungle, build up some airspeed, get to translational lift, and then after that, we'd be flying. And we'd take these guys out. I don't know if we can take them out to the repose in Da Nang Harbor, but that was the plan. We were going to take them out and get them taken care of. Well, I'm looking back there. I'm clearing the pilot as we're going aft. And, you know, whatever I'm telling them. And I'm right underneath the main transmission and the engine. So it's really noisy. And normally you can hear yourself in the headset when you're talking to somebody in the ICS. But I couldn't really hear myself because of all this outside noise. And I see these trees over there, not great big huge trees, but big enough. And they're pretty tall. And I'm saying, sir, don't go left anymore. And I'm not yelling at him, but I'm really loud because I want to make sure he hears me. And of course he could hear me, I just didn't know that. But you could hear the rotors, you know, losing turns. You could hear them, you know, slowing down. Because he was just pulling as much power as he could, but the engines couldn't keep the rotors turning at 100%. So we're drooping. And I'm looking out there, and I'm like this on the ramp, and I'm looking, and I see those blades hit the trees, and they just disintegrate. I say, "Trees," or something a little bit more profane. And of course, we start to fall. You need both fore and aft rotors for the 46 to be effective, you know. So, and we didn't have the aft rotors anymore. And I'm thinking on the way down, am I going to remember this when I'm dead? And I was also thinking of the Wile E. Coyote Roadrunner cartoons where the coyote winds up underneath the rock by the time it hits the bottom of the canyon. And I was wondering if that was going to be me. But you know, time kind of stretches when you're in that situation. It seemed like it took a little bit of a while, but we fell about 60 feet. It didn't take too long to hit the ground, and I wrote a narrative about it, and I was kind of joking. I said, we fell 60 feet, but the ground broke our fall. But a CH-46 cabin is 25 feet long between the aft pylon, where it attaches, and the cockpit. And we were twisted 90 degrees. The cockpit was on its right side, and I was sitting on the ramp just level. And some trees had come up through the aircraft. One came up close to, had to be really close to my left arm because I think it hit it. It was all, I thought I had broken it. I thought I had a big Buck General knife that my aunt had sent me on request. I thought that was going to go into my leg. It didn't, but my bullet bouncer hit my hip. I thought that had done some damage to my hip. But over here, a tree had come up, something had come up, and when we stopped, you know, my hands hit the deck like that. And that's what sent me up to Yokosuka. I had pretty deep cuts in doing this, looking at my hand, and I'm thinking, wow, that's pretty. I looked over to see if it had gone through because it was deep, but it wasn't bleeding. It was surprising. I said, wow, that's not bleeding. Look at that, you know. And meanwhile, all these guys, all these medevacs were, you know, were moaning. They were praying, crying, and everything. And you know, so I realized, wait. I said, NATOPS, you know, help the passengers. So, you know, that's where the training comes in, and it's essential because in situations like that, the higher levels of brain function aren't working. It has to be reflex. And so I said, okay, we're going to do this, and I was going to start doing something, but then I heard something running up the side of the hill towards us, and I said, gooks. Well, I still had my M60. I said, as soon as I see their heads, I'm going to open up. They're not going to get us. And then I reconsidered. I said, you know, we didn't take any fire. Let me make sure who these guys are first. And it was a patrol that they had sent down a squad from the LZ we had just left because it was so steep. We fell out of their eyesight. They couldn't see us. They knew we fell. They knew we crashed, but they didn't know what happened to us. The blades were still turning. Ken Altazan went in the cockpit, pulled the power levers back, shut the engines down, and that stopped. But the rotor blades, the stubs, hitting up against the rocks and everything, that's what they thought was us rolling down the hill. And these were their buddies. So they sent this squad down, and then they were coming back up the hill to our position. They went down below us, then they're coming back up. And had I opened up on them, there would have been some dead guys that day. And so I'm glad I had that, not presence of mind, but doubt in my own mind of, you know, is this the right thing to do? Until I can positively identify who these guys are. So then at that point, we helped bring these medevacs back up into the zone. I had burned my hand lowering this chainsaw down, and my arm was, you know, was hurt, but you know, did what I could. And but nobody got killed. None of the medevacs died, which pretty miraculous. We didn't burn. We didn't have much fuel anyway. There was a tree stump that came up through the cockpit, ripped the armor-plated seat right out of its mounts. And Major Lowry had like an abrasion, not a cut, but you know, and that was from the tree. I think the only person who wasn't wounded was the co-pilot, Lieutenant Burns. I think the tree stopped here, and you know, he looked at it. So he, as far as I know, had no injuries sustained from that crash. But I remember Major Lowry standing on the ramp, looking a little bit dazed and everything, which is understandable. I also remember vaguely, I'm pretty certain he wasn't impaled on the tree, but there was a grunt that was like, I think, hanging from a branch or something on the tree. But again, nobody was killed as far as I can recall. That's what I remember them saying. Yeah, no one was killed. And then later on that afternoon, an Air Force Jolly Green Giant came in, took out all the medevacs. not just one trip, took out all the medevacs. And I thought maybe I should go on that, because I thought my arm was busted. I knew my hand was in bad shape, and thought I had damaged my hip. I said, you know, these other guys aren't going, so I'm not going to be the only guy getting medevaced out of here. So I spent that night in the zone. So now it's 1968. I've flown a couple of times. I did crash May 12th, 1968 with a bunch of guys. And I got sent up to Yokosuka, Japan. I was gone for about a month, so that's from May 12th maybe to the middle of June of '68. So they realized they could get along without me, I suppose, in metal shop. And I come back, and the aircraft are getting, you know, they're getting tired. The crew chiefs are getting a little tired. They needed some fresh blood in the crew chief area, and I was still real anxious. I wanted to fly. I'm sure 90% of the guys in the shops would fly every day if they were allowed to, but then they wouldn't get their avionics work done, their hydraulics work done. So I still wanted to fly as much as I possibly could, and I forget exactly now how I volunteered, but I let it be known I wanted to be a crew chief, and Gunny Agnew let me become a crew chief. He said, okay, take care of that aircraft out there. It was a bird that had been cannibalized, so it had lots of parts missing, but they were coming back. You know, they were going to need to be put on, and the ship to be made airworthy again. So it was, and it became, maybe subconsciously, it became apparent, or we became aware that that was our mission, to support the grunts, to make sure that they had what they needed to, so that they could survive. And 364 wasn't the only squadron supporting the grunts up on 881 South during the siege of Khe Sanh, but we were the primary squadron. We did the most. And because going in there every day, they knew we were going to be shot at. They were going to be receiving incoming mortar rounds, artillery rounds when we showed up. It was made clear to us in actions and our deeds that it was essential, that they couldn't get by without us. And we knew that they were depending on us, and we thought the world of those guys. And they really appreciated us doing what we did, because they knew what we didn't think about it the way they thought about it. We didn't think we were doing anything really that special, but they thought, excuse me, they thought that we were really doing something special, because they appreciated taking fire more than we did. We were in there 15 seconds, 20 seconds. Might have gotten exciting then, but we were out of it. They were there and had to sustain that all the time, and we appreciated that. We wanted them to live. We wanted them to survive and be able to get back home. So, in fact, in 1969, they started to cut back on flight time, and I had been used to the effort during Khe Sanh and other operations that were demanding, but it was going to be whatever it took. But about spring of 1969, when they had started cutting back on the flights, so we've got blade time, or we've got to go back and change crews. I would be back there, I'd be stomping on that deck, because we could go back. There was no reason we couldn't bring them some water or resupply, whatever, but water was important, certainly. So there were operational restrictions that were not physical restrictions. You know, the policy is we aren't going to fly more than so many hours a day blade time, you know. But when at one of the reunions in Pensacola, I believe it was 2002, we're out there at the beach at one of the hotels, and I run into a couple of Marines that are going through avionics training at Pensacola, and started to talk to them, and I initiated. I said, listen, I said, your job is to support the grunts, and just giving them a little bit of a pep talk, because you go in, you don't realize normally, if it's not a combat situation, you know what you're there for. I'm there to just, you know, fix a radio, and that's what you think you're supposed to do. But there's a reason you're fixing that radio. There's a reason you're repairing that hydraulic leak, whatever. So I gave them this little talk, and I started to tell them about the exploits of one of these crew chiefs that I thought very, very highly of. He had gotten a Navy Cross, so there was a lot of legitimate reasons to think highly of this fella. And there he comes. He's walking down this little balcony where I was with these two fellas. And I said, hey, this is Guy Gomez. And he had his little cover on with the Navy Cross ribbon up there. And almost the first words out of his mouth, I said, Guy, these guys are going to avionics course. And he says to them, your primary job is to support the grunts. And I said, this is great. I mean, this isn't rehearsed. I didn't have a chance to tell him, hey, this is what I told these guys. So I think that made an impression on him. And I think if you need motivation at all, that should be motivation enough. I'm not here just to put my time in for 20 or whatever for 4 years. I'm going to get out. I don't like the Marine Corps. I'm here to do a job, and it means lives are going to be saved. And that's what makes it important. So, so yeah, I'm glad I had that little conversation with those guys, and Guy's comment was the exclamation point at the end of that whole thing. So.